now we are going to go to the play, the wedding play. So what happened is that for a long time, the Arakanese out of Burma and Portuguese were raiding coastal areas of Bengal, taking slaves and selling them different places. And from 1623, the Dutch arrived in Arakan, 2 days before, looking for slaves because they needed slaves because they just massacred the people in the Banda Island. But also, few years earlier, they conquered Jakarta and they destroyed that city. Now they were rebuilding, and they also had some places where clothes were growing. I don't have all the understanding and details, but the story that you will hear connected today is plausible, right? Because they did take men, women, and children as slaves. It's in the list, and I traced, different whatever. So it's plausible. It's not real story. It's a plausible story from that period.
Do you want to introduce the lovely people who are going to do their reading?
That would be helpful. That would be.
I had a question. So they took the slaves from Banda,
No,
Aceh, or
no. What happened is, there were slaves everywhere, right? And people were capturing and selling. But within what we call Indonesian archipelago, the amount of slaves that were available were very few. Right? But that needed a larger number. So they found Arakan, where the Portuguese and the Arakanese were bringing Bengali slaves. Bengal. And in South India, in Pulikate, they found on the coast, but another source of that slavery in the 16th century. The 2 people, we have Tasnia, you can tell your full name,
What's the come?
and Anthony. They have worked with us before, and I don't want to say anymore, they're very good here.
Thank you very much. Long ago in the shimmering seas of the Molucca, a cluster of 11 tiny islands known as the Banda Islands held a secret treasure that the world coveted nutmeg. These rugged specks of land were the only place on earth where the nutmeg tree thrived, yielding spices so rare, so precious, that they were worth their weight in gold. Traders braved treacherous seas and towering waves, lured by the promise of untold riches, for the Bandas were a jewel in the crown of the spice trade. But fortune's globe cast long shadows. In 1621, the Dutch East India Company, driven by greed and the dream of monopoly, unleashed a grim chapter of history. Under the command of Governor General Cohen, they turned their ambitions into atrocities and slaughtering the native Bandanese people in a ruthless bid to control the nutmeg trade. Those who survived managed to flee to the sea room of the K Islands. Others were made into slaves, and their land ceased and their voices silenced. To work the nutmeg forest, they now belong to the Dutch. Thousands of enslaved people were brought in from Bengal and the Coromandel coast of India. Stripped of their homes and freedom, they toiled in harsh conditions to fuel the Dutch Empire's insatiable hunger for profit. For nearly 2 centuries, the wealth of the Netherlands was built on the labour and the suffering of these people, while the sweet fragrance of nutmeg masked a bitter legacy of cruelty. The seeds of the Bandanese genocide were sown in a bitter spice wars between the Dutch and the English. The Dutch, driven by their desire for monopoly, clashed with the English, who sought a share of the lucrative nutmeg trade. When the Dutch rejected their ambitions, the English turned to the Bandanese islanders, inciting resistance against the Dutch, who were tightening their grip with cohesive contracts and violent enforcement. The English promised aid to the islanders but ultimately failed to deliver. They briefly acquired one of the Banda Islands in 1616, only to be expelled in October 1620. What followed was a dark chapter, the Banda Massacre and the devastating genocide of 1621 at the hands of the Dutch. But the tides of history would shift. During the Napoleonic Wars of 1810, the British took over the Bandas and spirited away the prized nutmeg seedlings. They planted them in the far-flung corners of the empire, breaking the Dutch monopoly and spreading the once exclusive spice across the globe. Thus, the Bandas lost their claim to their uniqueness. Their allure dimmed, but their history remained a poignant reminder of the human cost of greed. This is not just a story of a distant archipelago. It is a tale of one of the enslaved who fell victim to the Dutch atrocities. This is the tale of Bilkis.
I was a child of the loom, my fingers weaving dreams into threads finer than the morning mist. In my village, Dela, life was humble but whole. I had my family, my future, a boy I liked, and a marriage proposal promised. I was only 12, but oh, how my heart danced with those innocent dreams. But that life, my life, was snatched from me. I remember the screams, the fires that ate through our homes, the heat of those fires burning through my veins as the fear choked me, the merciless hands that bound me. I pleaded, please, don't kill me. I'll do what you want. And then I was dragged away from the looms, the waters, and the love that had cradled me. Away from my family, away from my dreams of marriage, away from everything I ever knew. Everything suddenly lost its colour. It was as if I was seeing the world through smoke-filled eyes. That day I lost my childhood, I lost my family, and I lost my dreams. Days later, I stood in a vineyard with large growing coat. Salt crusted my lips and the sun burned my skin. All thoughts had left me. I was numb from the shock. Rocking to the sway of the big Julia on choppy waters, the days dragged one after another. The sun set on the horizon, day after day, welcoming the moon to reflect its silver light over the waves, a poignantly beautiful sight amidst an ugly moment in my life. Further and further from everything I had known. I was alone. I was lost and I didn't know what the future held for me. I just held on to the hope that my family had survived, that they were alive and that they were praying for my return. Hungry, tormented and shattered men, women and children sat and lay inside the vessel, awaiting their fate. The cries of children, the women and even grown men haunted me through those treacherous days. I could smell the fear, the pain and the loss of everyone captured and held within the bowels of the vessel. Through confinement, and in some cases severe beating, many of the captives died. This was the first time that I had ever seen a dead person. But by the end of the journey, the brutality of the Arcanese and Portuguese slave raiders reduced some of us to a shell, resigned to our fate. All hope and defiance was stripped of us, buried along with the dead that they threw into the sea in the Caledon River. 3 months later, I found myself in a new strange land. A man called Master Pelotson had purchased me and now owned me as his property. He told me,
I paid a high price for you, my dear. You are beautiful and worth every coin, and you will see to my comfort and pleasure and anything else I demand of you.
There were many girls like me on many other plantations, or Perkins as they were called, who were forced to become mistresses. When I first saw the master, he looked very different from anyone that I had ever known before. His skin was pink, and his hair looked like jute. He was huge and looked twice as big as anyone I knew or had seen before. As a skilled weaver, I should have been in Morocco by now, not in the Banders. The king of the Arakan had banned foreigners from buying new slaves brought to his kingdom who had skills in demand in his country. But my master told me,
I bought you through a special request of a friend, the captain of a ship, Jaeger. He paid a bribe to the local official to allow me to buy you. You are mine, my property, and you will serve me in my home fields as I command.
property. The words felt heavier than the sun that beat down on us as we worked. But even then, even in those darkest of times, I knew I was more than they could ever shame. Every trial I faced, every tear that fell, was a piece of myself being rebuilt. Quietly, stubbornly, piece by piece. I remember him, the master. He often said I was special, beautiful even, from the day that I arrived. His words, meant to flatter, only filled me with dread. He would cut my work close so he could keep me near, his gaze lingering longer than it should. But I wanted none of it. I didn't like him. I only longed for the company of the other women, for the small comfort of their presence and the shared strength that passed between us as we worked side by side. Our work was meticulous, and every day felt endless. As women, we were tasked with splitting open the nutmeg fruits, revealing the hard seeds inside. The soft red covering, the mace, was carefully removed before we spread the seeds out under the hot sun to dry. We worked in groups of 5s, our hands moving in rhythm, our gestures and glances forming a language of their own when words failed us. At first, communication was a challenge. We were from different lands, Bengal and beyond, and spoke different tongues. But over time, as I began to learn a little Malay and others like me did the same. The men worked the nutmeg trees, tending to them with quiet precision. They cleared the overgrowth, planted new saplings, and harvested the precious fruits. When the work of splitting and drying became too much, they joined us, their hands rough from labor. Still, the women had a burden that the men did not. We were also tasked with cooking. Though even in our exhaustion, we prepared meals to feed the workers, finding small moments of solace in the shared act of eating. Looking back, these memories, they're not just of toil and pain, they're of survival. Even in my despair, I held on to fragments of my past. I refused to let go of these memories. I remembered my mother's hands as she washed me in the pond, my father's voice calling me the most skilled weaver he had ever seen. I remembered the boy who once smiled at me. These memories, though painful, they kept me alive. They were my strength, my motivation to carry on, waiting for the time when I would be free to return to my loved ones. 4 months into my captivity, I couldn't see a way out. I focused on surviving, learning everything that I could. Maybe, just maybe one day, I'd find a way to return home, to see my family again. But for now, all I could do was endure. Being curious by nature, I asked the master about this place, the Banders. I remember a conversation we had in the nutmeg garden. I've been wondering, why are there so many slaves working in the nutmeg gardens? What happened to the people that lived here before?
They betrayed us, rebelled, the local people. They broke every agreement we made with them.
But what did they do?
They ambushed and killed our leaders, made deals with the English. We promised to help them fight us. They were fools. They didn't know what they were dealing with. Many of my friends, colleagues, good men, were killed by the treacherous Bandanese. We had no choice but to fight back. And we won. We conquered the Bandar Islands.
But I heard that you killed most of them after you won and took control.
That's true, but victory, it wasn't secure. Some of the leaders, like the one who lived over there, they kept making deals with the English. English promised them arms, told them that they were more powerful than us. They made promises of a great king, King James, who would come to their rescue.
So you killed them because of the English?
It wasn't just that. They emboldened by these English lies. They thought that they could bring us down. We fought. We paid with blood and money for this place. The nutmeg trade. It was our right to control it. And if the English hadn't meddled, they wouldn't have stayed alive. But then you wouldn't be here.
So the English are to blame for everything?
Exactly. We wanted them to accept our monopoly. They could have benefited, lived in peace. But the English ruined it. So don't blame us for what happened to them. Blame them.
Blame them.
Yes, they ruined everything.
And now we pay for your wars. At first, I felt a sense of relief when my master said he would be cutting my working hours in half. He wanted me to spend the rest of the time with him, whenever he desired. And he was kind, treating me with a gentleness I hadn't expected. But then one day he told me he liked me, said he was lonely. I told him he should find a wife. I told him about my own life, how I was supposed to be married, how they had taken me before I could even say goodbye. He seemed to understand, even empathize, and said he was sorry for what had happened to me. I didn't trust his words, but I didn't say anything. Then he told one of his helpers to leave, to go do something else. I asked if I could go and leave too, wanting to be with the other woman where I felt safer, but he said not now. Then, without warning, he grabbed my left hand, holding it tight, and pulled me towards him.
You are special. Your beauty makes life more bearable for me.
I pushed against him. "Don't touch me!" I cried, my voice trembling with desperation. "It's not allowed in my religion. Please, I beg you." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. He was relentless, too big, too strong for me to resist. The weight of his body pressed down on me, suffocating any hope I had left. When he was done, he said,
I'm sorry.
That's all he said when he left the room the first time. Sorry. Sorry doesn't undo the violation. Sorry doesn't erase the bruises. Sorry won't bring my honor back. These were just words. He wasn't sorry. He didn't stop. He didn't grow tired of me. He would continue to take what he wanted, whenever he wanted, with no regard for my humanity. I was in pain, so much pain. My body ached and my mind felt like it was shattering. I became ill from it all. I couldn't leave the house anymore, couldn't be with the other women like I used to. He made me stay in the house, serve him like his wife. But it wasn't kindness, it was control. Every time I did something wrong, something he didn't like, he would beat me. The rules he set were suffocating. What I could do, who I could see, how often I could leave the house, where I could go. I was no longer a person. I was his mistress, his possession, and he reminded me of that every day.
You are my mistress. You serve me. When and how I say. You don't leave the house. You do not need to see anyone else. You will abide by my rules. I tell you what to do and where to go. And if you disobey me, you must be punished. You are mine, and you will serve me just like you're meant to.
Sometimes, in the quiet moments, when I thought of my family, I almost lost all hope. I didn't know if I could ever break free from this. Every time I tried to imagine a life beyond this, his grip on me tightened even more. For months, I felt nothing but fear and despair. But then, slowly, something shifted in me. I looked at the sea one night, its waves relentless yet free, and I made a promise. I will endure. I will escape. I will find my family again. I hated the master, and my hatred overcame the fear and despair. A few months later, I became ill while working under a nutmeg tree. Unable to get better, the other women took me back to the house. My master was with visitors and demanded to know why I wasn't working. I told him I couldn't sit or stand from the pain and I needed to rest. He allowed me to go to the bedroom, and later he called for an old healer woman who, after examining me, said, "MashaAllah, you're going to have a baby." I cried. She asked why I was crying, and I told her I didn't want the baby. I'm not a married woman. I'm pregnant because the master violated me, forced himself on me. I know the baby is innocent, but I don't want this child. The woman bowed her head and left in a hurry, fearful of the master's reaction. I was left alone in my grief. When my master found out, he became enraged. He didn't want a child, only my obedience. One evening, after drinking heavily, he came to the room with a look of anger. He spent hours tormenting me, mentally and physically, eating me viciously. By morning, I realized what had happened. The baby was gone. I had miscarried. One day, my master stormed into the Perkin, his face red with fury, his voice echoing with curses that made even the birds scatter. 5 of his slaves had vanished, and the others swore they knew nothing of it. He didn't believe them. He paced back and forth, muttering about how they were all liars, scheming for their chance to flee. His anger twisted into worry. Without these men, how would he meet the VOC's relentless demands for nutmeg and maize in the coming harvest? His solution was cruel as it was predictable, longer hours for everyone. And for me, it meant returning to the nutmeg garden once more. Although the loss of my innocent child hurt me, I was glad I was no longer under the master's watchful eye. I began mixing with the other slaves, others who had suffered like me, women who were violated, men whose dignity was ripped from them through violence and cruelty. We all shared the common experience of violence, loss, and grief. A few months later, the master had purchased a new mistress, a young Bilkis woman from Northampton. After that day, I was merely a worker. I hardly ever saw the master. I didn't go to the house. At the master's Perkin, I often watched a man scale the nutmeg tree as if he were a part of them, his movements swift and effortless. He was stronger than any of the other men, his muscles taut from years of labour. Though his words were few, his actions spoke volumes. There was a quiet kindness in the way that he noticed me, always ready to lend a hand or offer a moment of unspoken understanding. Then, one evening, before I could stop myself, the words tumbled out. "How did the other 5 slaves escape?" The moment I spoke, my heart froze, and I held my breath, dreading his reaction. Had I just betrayed myself? Would he turn on me, his suspicion flashing in his eyes? But as we worked under the fading light, he merely leaned closer and asked quietly, "Do you want to escape?" I froze. The question was like a sharp breeze cutting through the heat of the day. My eyes darted around to see if anyone else had just heard that. I said nothing, unsure if this was a trap. Could he be a spy for Barrett, our master? He must have noticed my hesitation because he added softly, "Don't worry, I won't tell anyone. If you want to escape, I might even help you." I said nothing that day, but later when we were alone again, he began to tell me his story. He was Bengalese, one of the few locals left after the massacre. The rest of us, those who laboured in the nutmeg gardens, had been brought from faraway lands like Bengal. I shared my story with him, telling him about how they kidnapped me and dragged me to this island. He nodded solemnly, then revealed something I hadn't known. I'm a relative of one of the leaders they executed in 1621, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of memory. They sent me to Batavia, first to dig canals, then they brought me back here. My job was to show new slaves how to care for the nutmeg trees, how to tend to them, harvest the fruit, and prepare the mason nuts. Even as he spoke of his duties, there was a quiet fire in his voice, a defiance that hadn't been snuffed out by years of servitude. He told me that some Bandanese had escaped to some faraway islands like Ceres and Key, where they had found refuge. Sometimes, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, their relatives come back in Kora boats to help others escape. It's planned carefully, usually on moonlit nights. It happens more than the Dutch think. His words planted a seed of hope in my heart, though I still couldn't be certain of his intentions. Was he truly an ally, or was this some cruel test to root out escape plans? I decided to tread cautiously, but for the first time I began to dream. I imagined slipping away under a silver moon, leaving this island and its endless toil behind. When we crossed paths again, we spoke briefly, always under the guise of work. One day he hinted he wouldn't be here much longer. You could be free, he said, nodding toward a bird of paradise perched nearby. His words stirred something in me, and I dared to ask how. He spoke softly of Kora boats coming from the K Islands to take Bandanese escapees. He planned to leave, and he offered me a chance to join him. Then, on one moonlit night, when the master was very drunk, he and I made our escape. We slipped out of the garden unseen. It was night, but there was a lot of visibility due to the moonlight. The sea became both our escape and our adversary, roaring as it determined to claim us. We, and the other slaves in the Kora, fighting for our freedom, battled the fury of the ocean with every ounce of our strength, knowing that there would only be one outcome of failure, and that would be death. Nevertheless, the boat capsized. When the Kora capsized and was wrenched away by the violent waves, the ocean became our battleground. Salt stung my skin and the tide tried to pull us under, but I forced my limbs to keep moving. And against all odds, we endured and we survived, and at last we stumbled into the shores of Gunung, a volcanic island shrouded in lush green forests. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and brine, but the beauty of the place belied its harshness. Mangoes and coconuts hung tantalizingly above us, but hunger mocked us from below. That first night, I lay on the coarse soil, on top of some banana leaves we had found, my stomach empty, the ache of survival sealing my sleep. The desperation is a stern teacher. By day we foraged and hunted, learning to trap small birds that we roasted over makeshift fires. The young coconuts became lifelines, their sweet water cooling our parched throats. When rain blessed us, we scrambled to catch it in anything we could find, each drop a fleeting treasure. We moved carefully, always alert. The others watched for passing boats that might ferry us to safety, while I scanned the trees for hiding places, wary of Dutch patrols. To them, I was more than just an escaped fugitive. I was a commodity to be reclaimed and punished, which I heard would be so severe you would wish for death rather than experience that cruelty.
Gone? They gone, the slaves. They just slipped away in night time, like rats. Do they understand what this means? What this has cost me? Do they think being a Perkinier is easy? That it's a life of comfort? The Dutch East India Company. They've got us in a vice grip. We work the land, harvest the nutmeg, and still we're not allowed to sell to anyone but them. A fixed price, no bargaining, no freedom. It's not right. And now, this, slaves dying, or worse, escaping. How am I supposed to meet the demands with half my workforce gone, replacing them? It's a never-ending drain. We came here for a chance, land, profit, power even. They promised us that, and let's not pretend. The women were part of it too, and now a man needs comfort, right? But the Moluccans, no, too bold, too much. Japanese and Bilkis women are better, beautiful, quieter, more obedient. But now, what do I have left? Minimal labour, no stability, no peace. How do I meet the quotas? How do I make a profit when my workers are running off like this? I have given everything for this, and this is what I get. Rebellion, ruin.
Days blurred into weeks. A month passed before another Kora appeared on the horizon, its rowers gesturing urgently for us to board. Relief mingled with uncertainty as I stepped onto the weathered planks. The man I had grown close to during our time on colonial peace sat beside me, offering quiet companionship as the boat began its eastward journey. As the oars churned the water, I told him my story of the faraway land where I was born, the winding rivers of Bengal, and the life I had been stolen from. His eyes were filled with curiosity and something more. The dawning realization that my world was as foreign to him as his was to me. The journey to the K Islands was a test of endurance. Food was scarce and the sea stretched endlessly around us, indifferent to our plight. When we finally reached the shore, the Bandanese refugees who had escaped earlier greeted us with cries of joy. The man I had come to trust was pulled into warm embraces, surrounded by relatives and friends who had feared him lost. But I stood apart, the silence around me as heavy as the sea we had crossed. I was not one of them. Their whispered questions began almost immediately. What do we do with her? Who is she to us? Their voices faded into the background as I stared at the horizon. A stranger in yet another land, my future still uncertain. In the K Islands, I rebuilt my life. I married the man I had shared the journey with. One of his aunts had suggested he marry me so we could start a family. She listened to my story and assured me that it was all Allah's will, urging me to not complain. Allah commands marriage, she said, adding that someone like me couldn't live alone in their community. I looked at him, remembering his kindness and how he had saved me, and I agreed. We married, and within 3 years we had 2 children, then a third. We settled in Eilat, where our children grew up. But not a day goes by when I don't think of my family in Tela. My mother's gentle smile, my sister's laughter, my father's pride in my work. Are they alive? Do they dream of me as I dream of them? This is why I wrote my story, so that one day, perhaps generations from now, my children's children will find the descendants of my family. They will know who I was, who we were, and they will remember that even in the darkest of times, hope can light the way. I am Bilkis, a daughter, a weaver, a survivor. And though they try to erase me, I remain. I endure. I tell my story so that it may never be forgotten.
Right? We go to the next session. We have a couple of questions for these 2 people. Yeah. Any questions? Anybody want to ask a question? My sister. No, it was scripted by Dr. Canan Salih. She made it somewhere.
Yeah, I think Mohammed writes these wonderful books and as an academic, and we've got a fantastic director called Dr. Shannon, who lives in Cyprus.
We met her,
Yeah, she's wonderful, and she puts it into a she puts it into a dramatic form for us as actors to perform it, and we've done a couple of these things, and I think
Yeah, sorry, let's do that.
so. It's quite fun to do. Yeah.
Well, I suppose we know you. We ask you later.
Mine's really a comment. Are you aware of all of the work at the National Archives in what's called the High Court of Anthology Records?
No.
Well, in general with Britain, you're familiar with the India Office libraries you've talked about, all the records are there. In general, shipping lists don't survive people going abroad. The bottom line, the Custom House in Britain burnt the ground in 1814 and destroyed all the records, and we centralised them, which made life really difficult. But there are papers called the High Court of Admiralty Records, and the staff at the National Archives have got about a 17 years grant, because when the British captured ships through history, they got sold in prize courts. And those papers justified you could sell these ships in prizes. And they go back to about the mid-1500s. And so there's a huge indexing problem to work their way through that. And I know they've got, masses of Dutch material there.
Just one piece of information. What was I went to search for this. In 1610, the biggest ship England had ever built, traditional ship, Fragrans, was launched in Jackson.
Yeah.
It was destroyed on the shores of the island in Indonesia.
Destroyed.
Pulau Punjab,
Java.
near Java, West Java, right? So I went to Pulau Punjab to see if I can imagine where you are. I asked people, so they took me to an old man. He said, yes, he knows about it. So he told me. Next morning they were to take me, but they took me in the middle of the sea by a boat. They were talking about Second World War.
Yeah.
I would be.
But somebody has written a whole book on the trade's increase in the last couple of years.
I couldn't find much information. I'd be very interested to know more.
Somebody's written a whole book on it.
I've got pictures of Pulau Punjab.
I think Mohammed has travelled to these beautiful places. We are trying to get funding so we can do something on location. I don't think we're going to get it. I would love to perform to these wonderful people.
The person you need to talk to is Amanda Bevan.
Amanda Bevan.
She's essentially in charge of the early modern history section of the National Archives. And she knows probably as much as anybody what's in the National Archives. But specifically, she will have contacts through that to people abroad. And she's always really, really busy.
Yeah.
The book that we produce is there. You can pick up.
Yeah.
Right? We send a book to the one island. They're very kind of happy about it. We have to finish this section because we seriously.
Any other questions?
I think that's it.
Fine. Thank you very much.
Yeah.